Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Tech Quest Learning Point. I hope you all are doing great. I am Bashir. In my previous tutorial in this series of Azure Fundamental, I demonstrated that how to create Azure Blob Storage by using Azure Portal. Today I am going to start a discussion on the topic of Azure Identity, Access and Security. In this tutorial, we will be introduced to the Azure Identity, Access and Security services and tools. You will learn about directory services in Azure, authentication methods and access control. You will also cover things like zero trust and defense in depth and how they keep your cloud safer. You will wrap up with the introduction to Microsoft Defender for Cloud. I can assure you all that this tutorial will make sense to you about Azure Fundamentals. The ultimate target of this tutorial is to make you prepare for the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. If anyone want to be the Microsoft Certified Azure Fundamentals, this tutorial will be the right choice for them to make clear the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. This tutorial is derived from the Microsoft Learning Paths for Azure Fundamentals exam, so anyone can rely on this tutorial to take the preparation for the exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals. Let's see the contents of this tutorial at a glance. This tutorial covers some of the authorization and authentication methods available with Azure. It covers the various topics related to the Azure Identity, Access and Security, including directory services, authentication methods, external identities and guest access, AD conditional access, role-based access control, concept of zero trust, defense in depth model, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The exam AZ900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals includes 3 knowledge domain areas such as number 1, describe cloud concept, number 2, describe Azure authentication and services, and number 3, describe Azure management and governance. This tutorial is the 18th episode of the Azure Fundamentals series and it is part of 3 knowledge domain. Active Directory Services. Active Directory Services Azure AD is a directory service that enables you to sign in and access both Microsoft Cloud applications and cloud applications that you develop. Azure AD can also help you maintain your on-premises Active Directory deployment. For on-premises environments, Active Directory running on Windows Server provides an identity and access management service that's managed by your organization. Azure AD is Microsoft's cloud-based identity and access management service. With Azure AD, you control the identity accounts, but Microsoft ensures that the service is available globally. If you have worked with Active Directory, Azure AD will be familiar to you. Who can be user of Azure AD? IT administrator. Administrator can use Azure AD to control access to applications and resources based on their business requirements. App developers. Developers can use Azure AD to provide a standard-based approach for adding functionality to applications that they build, such as adding SSO functionality to an app or enabling an app to work with a user's existing credentials. User can manage their identities and take maintenance actions like self-service password reset. Online service subscribers. Microsoft 365, Microsoft Office 365, Azure and Microsoft Dynamics CRM online subscribers are already using Azure AD to authenticate into their account. Azure AD provides services such as authentication. This includes verifying identity to access applications and resources. It also includes providing functionality such as self-service password reset, multi-factor authentication, a custom list of banned passwords, and smart lockout services. Single sign-on. Single sign-on SSO enables you to remember only one username and one password to access multiple applications. A single identity is tied to a user, which simplifies the security model. The users change roles or leave an organization. Access modifications are tied to that identity, which greatly reduces the effort needed to change or disable accounts. Application management. You can manage your cloud and on-premises apps by using Azure AD. Features like application proxy, SaaS apps, the My Apps portal, and single sign-on provide a better user experience. Device management. Along with accounts for individual people, Azure AD supports the registration of devices. Registration enables devices to be managed through tools like Microsoft Intune. It also allows for device-based conditional access policies to restrict access attempts to only those coming from known devices, regardless of the requesting user account. Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Azure Active Directory Domain Services Azure ADDS is a service that provides managed domain services such as domain join, group policy, lightweight directory access protocol LDAP, and Kerberos NTLM authentication. Just like Azure AD lets you use directory services without having to maintain the infrastructure supporting it, with Azure ADDS, you get the benefit of domain services without the need to deploy, manage, and patch domain controllers DCs in the cloud. Azure ADDS integrates with your existing Azure AD tenant. This integration lets users sign into services and applications connected to the managed domain using their existing credentials. You can also use existing groups and user accounts to secure access to resources. These features provide a smoother lift and shift of on-premises resources to Azure. When you create an Azure ADDS managed domain, you define a unique namespace. This namespace is the domain name. Two Windows Server domain controllers are then deployed into your selected Azure region. This deployment of DC is known as the replica set. You don't need to manage, configure, or update this DC. The Azure platform handles the DC as part of the managed domain, including backups and encryption at rest using Azure Disk Encryption. A managed domain is configured to perform a one-way synchronization from Azure AD to Azure ADDS. You can create resources directly in the managed domain, but they are not synchronized back to Azure AD. In a hybrid environment with an on-premises ADDS environment, Azure AD Connect synchronizes identity information with Azure AD, which is then synchronized to the managed domain. Azure Authentication Methods. Authentication is the process of establishing the identity of a person, service, or device. It requires the person, service, or device to provide some type of credential to prove who they are. Authentication is like presenting ID when you are traveling. It does not confirm that you are authenticated, it just proves that you are who you say you are. Azure supports multiple authentication methods, including standard password, single sign-on (SSO), multi-factor authentication (MFA), and passwordless. The security level compared to the convenience. Passwordless authentication is high security and high convenience, while passwords on their own are low security but high convenience. Single sign-on. Single sign-on SSO enables a user to sign in one time and use that credentials to access multiple resources and applications from different providers. For SSO to work, the different applications and providers must trust the initial authenticator. More identities mean more passwords to remember and change. Password policies can vary among applications. As complexity requirements increase, it becomes increasingly difficult for users to remember them. The more passwords a user has to manage, the greater the risk of a credential-related security incident. Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is the process of prompting a user for an extra phone or factor of identification during the sign-in process. MFA helps protect against a password compromise in situations where the password was compromised but the second factor was not. Think about how you sign into websites, email, or online services. After entering your username and password, have you ever needed to enter a code that was sent to your phone? If so, you have used multi-factor authentication to sign in. Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication. Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication is a Microsoft service that provides multi-factor authentication capabilities. Azure AD Multi-Factor Authentication enables users to choose an additional form of authentication during sign-in, such as a phone call or mobile app notification. Passwordless authentication. Features like MFA are a great way to secure your organization, but users often get frustrated with the additional security layer on top of having to remember their passwords. People are more likely to comply when it's easy and convenient to do so. Passwordless authentication methods are more convenient because the password is removed and replaced with something you have, plus something you are, or something you know. Passwordless authentication needs to be set up on a device before it can work. For example, your computer is something you have once it's been registered or enrolled. Azure now knows that it's associated with you. Now that the computer is known, once you provide something you know or are, such as a PIN or fingerprint, you can be authenticated without using a password. Microsoft Global Azure and Azure Government offer the following three passwordless authentication options that integrate with Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, Windows Hello for Business, Microsoft Authenticator app, FIDO2 security keys. Windows Hello for Business. Windows Hello for Business is ideal for information workers that have their own designated Windows PC. The biometric and PIN credentials are directly tied to the user's PC, which prevents access from anyone other than the owner. With public key infrastructure, PKI integration and built-in support for single sign-on SSO, Windows Hello for Business provides a convenient method for seamlessly accessing corporate resources on premises and in the cloud. Microsoft Authenticator app. You can also allow your employee's phone to become a passwordless authentication method. You may already be using the Microsoft Authenticator app as a convenient multi-factor authentication option in addition to a password. You can also use the Authenticator app as a passwordless option. FIDO2 security keys. The FIDO First Identity Online Alliance helps to promote open authentication standards and reduce the use of passwords as a form of authentication. FIDO2 is the latest standard that incorporates the web authentication WebAuthn standard. FIDO2 security keys are an unphishable standard-based passwordless authentication method that can come in any form factor. First Identity Online FIDO is an open standard for passwordless authentication. FIDO allows users and organizations to leverage the standard to sign in to their resources without a username or password by using an external security key or a platform key built into a device. Azure External Identities. An external identity is a person, device, service, etc. that is outside your organization. Azure AD External Identities refers to all the ways you can securely interact with users outside of your organization. If you want to collaborate with partners, distributors, suppliers, or vendors, you can share your resources and define your internal users can access external organizations. If you are a developer creating consumer-facing apps, you can manage your customers' identity experiences. External identities may sound similar to single sign-on. With external identities, external users can bring their own identities. Whether they have a corporate or government-issued digital identity or an unmanaged social identity like Google or Facebook, they can use their own credentials to sign in. The external user's identity provider manages their identity and you manage access to your apps with Azure AD or Azure AD B2C to keep your resources protected. The following capabilities make up external identities. Business to business B2B collaboration. Collaborate with external users by letting them use their preferred identity to sign into your Microsoft applications or other enterprise applications, SaaS apps, custom developed apps, etc. B2B collaboration users are represented in your directory typically as guest users. B2B Direct Connect. Establish a mutual two-way trust with another Azure AD organization for seamless collaboration. B2B Direct Connect currently supports Teams shared channels, enabling external users to access your resources from within their home instances of Teams. B2B Direct Connect users are not represented in your directory, but they are visible from within the Teams shared channel and can be monitored in Teams Admin Center reports. Azure AD Business to Customer B2C. Publish modern SaaS apps or custom developed apps, excluding Microsoft apps, to consumers and customers while using Azure AD B2C for identity and access management. Azure Conditional Access. Conditional access is a tool that Azure Active Directory uses to allow or deny access to resources based on identity signals. These signals include who the user is, where the user is, and what device user is requesting access from. Conditional access helps IT administrator empower users to be productive wherever and whenever. Protect the organization's assets. Conditional access also provides a more granular multi-factor authentication experience for users. For example, a user might not be challenged for second authentication factor if they are at a known location. However, they might be challenged for a second authentication factor if their sign-in signals are unusual or they are at unexpected location. Azure role-based access control. When you have multiple IT and engineering teams, how can you control what access they have to the resources in your cloud environment? The principle of least privilege says you should only grant access up to the level needed to complete a task. If you only need read access to a storage blob, then you should only be granted read access to that storage blob. Write access to that blob should not be granted, nor should read access to the other storage blobs. It's a good security practice to follow. However, managing that level of permissions for an entire team would become tedious. Instead of defining the detailed access requirements for each individual and then updating access requirements when new resources are created or new people join team, Azure enables you to control access through Azure Role-Based Access Control, Azure RBAC. Azure provides built-in roles that describe common access rules for cloud resources. You can also define your own rules. Each role has an associated set of access permissions that relate to that role. When you assign individuals or groups to one or more roles, they receive all the associated access permissions. Zero Trust Model. Zero Trust is a security model that assumes the worst case scenario and protects resources with that expectation. Zero Trust assumes breach at the outset and then verifies each request as though it originated from an uncontrolled network. Today, organizations need a new security model that effectively adapts to the complexity of the modern environment, embraces the mobile workforce, and protects people, devices, applications, and data wherever they are located. To address this new world of computing, Microsoft highly recommends the Zero Trust security model. Zero Trust security model is based on these guiding principles. Verify explicitly, always authenticate and authorizes based on all available data points. Use least privilege access. Limit user access with just-in-time and just enough access JIT/JEA. Risk-based adaptive policies and data protection. Assume breach. Minimize blast radius and segment access. Verify end-to-end encryption. Use analytics to get visibility, drive threat detection, and improve defenses. Adjusting to zero trust. Traditionally, corporate networks were restricted, protected, and generally assumed safe. Only managed computers could join the network. VPN access was tightly controlled and personal devices were frequently restricted or blocked. The zero trust model flips that scenario. Instead of assuming that a device is safe because it's within the corporate network, it requires everyone to authenticate, then grants access based on authentication rather than location. Defense in depth. The object of defense in depth is to protect information and prevent it from being stolen by those who are not authorized to access it. A defense in depth strategy uses a series of mechanisms to slow the advance of an attack that aims at acquiring unauthorized access to data. Acquiring. You can visualize defense in depth as a set of layers with the data to be secured at the center and all the other layers functioning to protect that central data layer. Physical security. Physical security, securing access to buildings and controlling access to computing hardware within the data center are the first line of defense. With physical security, the intent is to provide physical safeguards against access to assets. These safeguards ensure that other layers cannot be bypassed and loss or thefts is handled appropriately. Microsoft uses various physical security mechanisms in its cloud data centers. Identity and access. The identity and access layer is all about ensuring that identities are secure, that access is granted only to what's needed, and that sign-in events and changes are locked. At this layer, it's important to control access to infrastructure and change control using single sign-on SSO and multi-factor authentication. Audit events and changes. Perimeter. The network perimeter protects from network-based attacks against your resources. Identifying these attacks, eliminating their impact, and alerting you when they happen are important ways to keep your network secure. At this layer, it's important to use DDoS protection to filter large-scale attacks before they can affect the availability of a system for users. Use perimeter firewalls to identify and alert on malicious attacks against your network. At this layer, the focus is on limiting the network connectivity across all your resources to allow only what's required. By limiting this communication, you reduce the risk of an attack spreading to the other systems in your network. At this layer, it's important to limit communication between resources, deny by default, restrict inbound internet access, and limit outbound access where appropriate. Implement secure connectivity to on-premises networks. Compute. Malware, unpatched systems, and improperly secured systems open your environment to attacks. The focus in this layer is on making sure that your compute resources are secure and that you have the proper controls in place to minimize security issues. At this layer, it's important to secure access to virtual machines, implement endpoint protection on devices, and keep systems past and current. Application. Integrating security into the application development lifecycle helps reduce the number of vulnerabilities introduced in code. Every development team should ensure that its applications are secure by default. At this layer, it is important to ensure that applications are secure and free of vulnerabilities, store sensitive application secrets in a secure storage medium, make security a design requirement for all application development. Data. Those who store and control access to data are responsible for ensuring that it's properly secured. Often, regulatory requirements dedicate the controls and process that must be in place to ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the data. In almost all cases, attackers are after data stored in a database, stored on disk inside virtual machines, stored in software as a service SaaS applications such as Office 365, managed through cloud storage. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud is a monitoring tool for security posture management and threat protection. It monitors your cloud, on-premises, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments to provide guidance and notifications aimed at strengthening your security posture. Defender for Cloud provides the tools needed to harden your resources, track your security posture, protect against cyber attacks, and streamline security management. Deployment of Defender for Cloud is easy. It's already natively integrated to Azure. Azure Native Services. Defender for Cloud is an Azure native service, and many Azure services are monitored and protected without needing any deployment. Let's consider you have an on-premises data center or you are operating in another cloud environment. In this situation, monitoring of Azure services may not give you a complete picture of your security situation. As per requirement, in order to gather security related data, a log analytics agent can automatically be deployed by Defender for Cloud. For Azure machines, deployment is handled directly. For hybrid and multi-cloud environments, Microsoft Defender plans are extended to non-Azure machines with the help of Azure Arc. Cloud Security Posture Management (CSPM) features are extended to multi-cloud machines without the need for any agents. Threats can be detected across Azure PaaS services, Azure Data Services, and networks with the help of Defender for Cloud. Azure PaaS services detect threats targeting Azure services including Azure App Service, Azure SQL, Azure Storage Account, and more data services. Azure Data Services. Defender for Cloud includes capabilities that help to classify data in Azure SQL automatically. It can provide assessments for potential vulnerabilities across Azure SQL and storage services and recommendations for how to mitigate them. Networks. Defender for Cloud helps to limit the exposure to brute force attacks. Defender for Cloud fills three vital needs as you manage the security of your resources and workloads in the cloud and on-premises. Continuously assess. Know your security posture. Identify and track vulnerabilities. Secure. Harden resources and services with Azure Security Benchmark. Defend. Detect and resolve threats to resources, workloads, and services. Continuously assess. Defender for Cloud helps you continuously assess your environment. Defender for Cloud includes vulnerabilities assessment solutions for your virtual machines, container registers, and SQL servers. Microsoft Defender for Servers includes automatic native integration with Microsoft Defender for endpoint. With this integration enabled, you will have access to the vulnerability findings from Microsoft Threat and Vulnerability Management. Between these assessment tools, you will have regular detailed vulnerability scans that cover your compute, data, and infrastructure. You can review and respond to the results of these scans, all from within Defender for Cloud. Secure. From authentication methods to access control to the concept of zero trust, security in the cloud is an essential basic that must be done right. In order to be secure in the cloud, you have to ensure your workloads are secure. To secure your workloads, you need security policies in place that are tailored to your environment and situation. Because policies in Defender for Cloud are built on top of Azure policy controls, you are getting the full range and flexibility of a world-class policy solution. In Defender for Cloud, you can set your policies to run on management groups across subscriptions and even for a whole tenant. Look into the picture. Here, secure score, recommendations status, and resource health are shown to help you understand how important each recommendation is to your overall security pursuits. Defender for Cloud groups the recommendations into security controls and adds a secure score value to each control. The secure score gives you an at a glance indicator of the health of your security posture, while the controls give you a working list of things to consider to improve your security score and your overall security posture. The first two areas, continuous access and secure, were focused on assessing, monitoring, and maintaining your environment. Defender for Cloud also helps you defend your environment by providing security alerts and advanced threat protection ATP features. Security alerts. When Defender for Cloud detects a threat in any area of your environment, it generates a security alert. Security alerts describe details of the affected resources, suggest remediation steps, provide in some cases an option to trigger a logic app in response. Advanced threat protection. Defender for Cloud provides advanced threat protection features for many of your deployed resources, including virtual machines, SQL databases, containers, web applications, and your network. Protections include securing and management ports of your VMs with just-in-time access and adaptive application controls to create allow lists for what apps should and should not run on your machines. Azure Directory Services. Azure Active Directory, Azure AD, is a directory service that enables you to sign in and access both Microsoft Cloud applications and cloud applications that you develop. Azure Active Directory Domain Services. Azure Active Directory Domain Services, Azure ADDS, is a service that provides managed domain services such as domain join, group policy, lightweight directory access protocol LDAP, and Kerberos/NTLM authentication. Single sign-on. Single sign-on SSO enables a user to sign in one time and use that credential to access multiple resources and applications from different providers. Multi-factor authentication. Multi-factor authentication is the process of prompting a user for an extra form or factor of identification during the sign-in process. Zero Trust Model. Zero Trust is a security model that assumes the worst case scenario and protects resources with that expectation. Zero Trust assumes breach at the outset and then verifies each request as though it originated from an uncontrolled network. Defense in depth. The objective of defense in depth is to protect information and prevent it from being stolen by those who are not authorized to access it. Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Defender for Cloud is a monitoring tool for security posture management and threat protection. It monitors your cloud, on-premises, hybrid, and multi-cloud environments to provide guidance and notifications aimed at strengthening your security posture. Advanced Threat Protection. Defender for Cloud provides advanced threat protection features for many of your deployed resources, including virtual machines, SQL databases, containers, web applications, and your network. Thank you for watching this tutorial. I hope you all have been able to take the idea about the Azure Identities, Access, and Securities. If you think this tutorial is helpful for learning the Azure Cloud Computing, please click on like button and request you all to share it more and more to the persons who are searching the tutorial like this. If you have any questions on this tutorial, opinions and queries about this channel, please type this in the comment box. You should also mail me. In the description box, email ID is given for you. Kindly subscribe this channel and click on the bell button so that you can get notification when new tutorial is published.